welcome back to the GamecockScoop.com podcast, the official podcast of GamecockScoop.com on Rivals. I'm Caleb. I'm back from my trip last week, and then joining me are Steven and Alan, who held down the fort last week. And I assume you guys talked about a lot of baseball names that I didn't listen to it, but I assume you guys talked about a lot of baseball names that didn't necessarily factor into what ultimately ended up happening. We're going to talk about the impact of South Carolina adding legendary LSU, Notre Dame, Air Force,
St. Thomas
head coach Paul Manieri. And I feel like I'm going to say that wrong several times. Alan, what was it again?
Manieri.
I'm not putting enough Y on there. Manieri. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about some football recruiting. So last weekend was the second of two big official visit weekends. This coming weekend, they're taking a weekend off from those, and then next weekend, the 22nd or 23rd, whatever day the Saturday is, will be another one of those big weekends before that kind of starts to slow down until the fall. There were 6 total welcome homes since last weekend, tweeted out by Beamer, and 4 of those have already come forward. So you got Jaquel Holloman, who on Rivals is listed as a 3-star athlete. He's from Blacksville, South Carolina. He's probably going to play on the defensive side of the ball. Most of his high school film is at running back. But he did come in and camp with South Carolina, and they've seen, what he can do defensively. And as I've said many times on this podcast, if Torian Gray thinks that he can play DB, I tend to just defer to his opinion there. The other defensive back you got was Christopher Hatfield out of Ludowici. I think that's how you say it, Georgia. Another 3-star, good size, 6'2", 185. Kind of an under-the-radar guy, wasn't even really ranked until South Carolina offered. So I don't think he's camped a ton. So it'll be interesting to see how, as people get more film on him, how his ranking kind of changes. You got Kobe Saki-Pra, I think that's how you say it, or Kobe Saki-Pra, defensive end out of Roswell, Georgia. Another lanky 6'3", pretty skinny right now, only listed at 218 pounds, but obviously that frame is a lot to be able to fill out. You compare him to Anthony Addison, who's also 6'4", 215. So, both kind of tall and skinny, but, you would hope getting under a collegiate weight program is going to fix that pretty quickly. And then just yesterday, you had tight end Preston Douglas out of North Palm Beach, Florida. He's also listed as an athlete on Rivals, but definitely was being recruited as a tight end by Sean Elliott. 6'3", 225, already got good size and more athletic than he looks, although I think he'll probably play a little bit more of the Nate Adkins sort of role that we saw a couple years back, where he will block in line, but also kind of squirt out on a little, middle of the field route.
Make one-handed catches against Clemson.
Yeah, we'll see if he's got that in him, but I definitely maybe has that potential. And then there are 2 more outstanding welcome homes. I think both of them, at least one of them, but I think both of them will be revealed in the next 48 hours. So I'm not going to mention any names because I'll let those kids have their moment. But check out GamecockScoop.com, and we will have full coverage as soon as those go public as well. I think there's several other names from the first 2 recruiting weekends that South Carolina made a really good impression on. It's just going to be a little bit longer of a process before we find out if they ultimately land there. And then obviously we'll go over that visitors list next week for that final big recruiting weekend. That's pretty much all I got on the football front right now. We did also get a bunch of times for the football schedule, right? If you want to go back a couple days ago on GamecockScoop.com, we broke down each of those windows that the school put out. There were 2 that are still kind of unknown. Do you remember off the top of your head?
It's Ole Miss in Clemson, because Clemson's ACC controlled, and they gave the Ole Miss the flex thing, so it won't be at noon, but it could be either 3:30 or a night game.
They're trying to leave it open for that to be the SEC game of the week, depending on how the seasons go, I guess.
If South Carolina's, what would that be, 4-0 at that point?
With a win over LSU.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, obviously a long time from now. But I did one quick note about the schedule. I did note, correct me if I'm wrong, both Alabama and Oklahoma, those back-to-back road trips were noon games.
Yep.
Yeah, Oklahoma got the early window, so
it could
potentially be an 11 o'clock local time start.
Yeah,
out there in
Oklahoma.
Oklahoma.
Is at 11 o'clock. Yep.
But the only thing I thought is, obviously that's going to be a brutal back-to-back road trip, no matter how you slice it. But probably the best you can hope for time-wise scenario, as far as the crowd's not going to be fully awake and ready to go yet. But anyway, let's talk some baseball. So last week, like I said, you guys broke down the list of candidates. All those candidates that you guys went over and that we were covering on GamecocksScoop.com were legitimate candidates. But we kept feeling like, is this just going to end up being Monty? I feel like that was all three of us just like, what? This doesn't, it feels like there's something missing, I guess. And then Alan kind of got the, not to go too far in depth or whatever, but you got the name Paul Manieri floated about 3 or 4 hours before it actually came out, but we were still like, no, that's not right? Like, this is just some weird posturing thing. Like, where's that name actually coming from? We didn't get a second source on it until literally right when D1 Baseball and what's the guy over there?
Baseball America.
I think Baseball America broke that one. Actually beat D1 to that one. But yeah, they that was the same thing. I had a former player text me and say, watch out for Paul Manieri. And I said, well, I thought he was joking.
I didn't see when I got.
I said, no, really, who are they really looking at? And he said, no, seriously, watch, because that's what's being kicked around right now.
Yeah, it was one of those scenarios where we probably were going to put out another hot board that evening, and he would have been on it, but we would have been like, maybe, but before we even got to that point, it broke that they had basically agreed on a deal. That all got finalized earlier this week by the board of trustees. Alan, can you tell me a little bit about the contract details on that? And then we'll obviously go into the impact of this.
Yeah, there's actually a lot to unpack with the contract. So this is a athletic department, and you alluded that this might happen last week, Stephen, but throwing a lot more money at baseball than it ever has. Paul Manieri is the first millionaire to coach. It's $1 million a year head coach to coach in South Carolina. He's at 1.3 for 5 years. Monty Lee is now the highest paid assistant coach in all of college baseball. He's making $550K a year. I knew that was a big deal to get him to stay. I've talked to recruits, players, that was kind of a tipping point for a lot of them. I certainly did not expect him to be the highest paid assistant in the country. The buyout, I think, is what gives you pause, and maybe they're just thinking if this goes really pear-shaped, he would step away on his own because he doesn't need the money. But it's a full buyout until basically after year 3, June 1st, 2027. So you're talking about basically a Jimbo Fisher deal if you clip him before the end of his 3rd season. After that, it goes down to half, and then it becomes a little more manageable. But then again, you're talking about a full buyout or a half buyout of a deal that's over $1 million a season. So it's a risk. My first thought was, okay, it's either going to work or it's not going to be Ray Tanner's problem. Is he going to be retired in 3 years? There's just so much to unpack here. But what do you guys think? I've been spinning in it for a couple days now, but what are your thoughts?
Well, just to address the contract thing, and then I'll let you go, Stephen, after. But just to address the contract thing, I do think maybe the fact that you've saved money, for lack of a better term, over the past few years with Shane Beamer and Lamont Paris. I mean, obviously they have gotten paid after they accomplished what they've accomplished here and there, but still relative to the rest of the league, you haven't been spending as much as say Steve Spurrier's share was back then, whenever you're looking at the way it's stacked up with the rest of the league. So I do think it gives you a little bit more flexibility here. And mentioning Spurrier's name, I mean, you're talking about a guy that is a legend. I mean, he comes back now that he's active. He's the active wins leader in college baseball. Has won College World Series, has been to 9?
6 of them.
6, sorry. He's won, conference championships as
over
recently
1,500 games total. Yeah.
So 2019 is what I think the last one was. So I don't know, worth the risk, I think. But Stephen, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I think one with Monty's deal, I think that kind of signals a clear indication that Hooray wants to be the coach following Paul Mainieri. And I think that's the hope is that he's successful and then he retires 4, 5, 6 years down the road and Monty Lee is right there to step in and be the next guy. I think that's clearly why I know they want to keep some of the roster.
No, but you're right. That's not a $550,000 a year assistant roster. You're right.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I believe the Citadel job, the head coach there made about $125,000 to $150,000 a year, which was the other one that Monty was rumored for. So, there's no reason to outbid the Citadel there. You did it by about 3.5 times what he would have gotten paid down there in Charleston. So, and I don't, he probably had some other offers that we were unaware of, but that was the main one that you'd heard kicked around. So I think they're clearly trying to send a signal, at least in the short term, to recruits that Monty's been recruiting, is that he's going to be there with you. He's going to be there. I'm sure he's going to be doing a lot of the day-to-day stuff. I kind of thought that maybe South Carolina was just going the Mac Brown route here, bring in the old established veteran that kind of good fundraiser, good at good track record, and just have some younger assistants around him, build a very good staff. I think he has built a good staff, and I know we'll get into that.
I want to talk about that too, yeah.
But that was my thought there. I think the first thing I texted Alan, just because it was so far out of left field, was legendary Rice head coach Wayne Graham. I said, was he not available? He's Wayne Graham won Rice's only national championship in the early part of this millennia, but he's he's in his 90s right now. But so that I was like, was that the hot board we were looking at here? The Wayne Graham Paul Mainieri board, but. I don't know. I'm still kind of on the fence about whether or not I liked it. Initially, I did not, but it's slowly starting to make a little bit more sense and maybe be a little bit, I'm coming around on it a little bit. I do like the staff he's put together. I think that's big. Again, there weren't a whole lot of players. Let's be honest. There weren't a whole lot of players on the roster I was worried about retaining. I mean, Petrie's the big key, but he's only going to be around for another year anyway. So it's not like he's a huge part of some rebuild or something like that, or your roster going forward. We'll just see how they do with the portal, how he does there and how he manages NIL. I know that was starting to become a thing when he was at LSU, but he had all the funds in the world at his disposal there, so it wouldn't have been an issue for him. But it's not going to tell us how he's going to be able to navigate that and handle that. South Carolina, which, like we were saying, is certainly getting an influx of money into the program, but it's still not going to be at LSU levels. As evidence, they just, I'm sure we're going to talk about this earlier, but Wofford Ace, I think it's Zach Cohen.
Yeah, he was on campus here, ended up getting to LSU.
He goes to LSU, and it's almost similar to the way it always happens in women's basketball with Angel Reese or Morrow. They go there and cancel all other visits after they step on foot and get their suitcase, and then it's done. But yeah, I'm still on the fence about it. I can tell you the former player that I conversed with about this one that gave me a heads up said his concern was, he said, I don't know how excited a roster of college kids is going to be to play for a guy who medically retired in 2021. He said to that, and in his upper 60s, he said that concerns me a little bit, but they will be happy. The current guys and the recruits will be, will obviously play and respond to Monty, but he said that was a concern of his too. And he was kind of the same way that me and Alan have talked about. He was just kind of floored that was the choice and that was the direction they went in. Not saying that it's awful, or it's bad or it's wrong, but just surprised that that's where the search landed. I hope, Alan, when you go to the press conference, I would love it if they're very I don't think they will be, just based on Ray Tanner's history of his press conferences, but it would be great if they were very transparent about this search, and if he would talk about, kind of how he settled on this and how long Mainieri had been in the conversation, and if he was turned down by other folks, or just kind of what, I know he's not going to say that, but I wish he would give a lot of transparency on what on what actually happened here.
I have a lot to unpack with what you just said there. I'm gonna, I guess, take this one at a time. On the Ray Tanner front, there, I did go to the softball presser yesterday just to kind of check it out. I know it's not one of our main beats, and he did not take questions. He just gave a little opening statement, so I'm assuming he will not take questions today. So let's go ahead and nip that one in the bud. The age thing, the health thing, he did retire medically after 2021 at LSU. Got them to a super in his last year, by the way. That's just one of those things where I think you just kind of have to trust him, right? Like if he says his body feels good and he's ready to go, like all you can do is take him at his word. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
oh yeah, I mean, Urban Meyer medically retired how many times?
Yeah, exactly.
And came back to win national championships at his next stop.
So I wanted to go to that, and I know you have a point, Caleb. I just wanted to go through the other members of the staff quickly we haven't talked about because there's two other assistants here. One of them has been approved by the board. One of them is still in Omaha, so he can't be until his team's done playing there. But Terry Rooney is coming from LSU. He was on the national title winning staff at LSU in 23. He was on Manieri's staff at LSU, I think, in 07 and 08. Had a stint in between as head coach at UCF, a couple other spots. He's going to be your pitching coach and recruiting coordinator. So Matt Williams is out after 1 year as pitching coach. And then the other guy who has not been confirmed yet, but they put it in the release. So I think the university is ready to announce it. The board hasn't. John Hendry, who's the director of scouting at Virginia. They're in Omaha right now. That seems like a pretty good track record to me. I assume, will be joining the Gamecocks whenever Virginia is done playing in Omaha. So that's the rest of the staff. Caleb, you've been sitting there for a bit. What do you have on this?
No, I mean, I think that it's probably the strongest staff that you've had since, I don't know, Ray Tanner's last couple of years.
Yeah.
Obviously Chad Holbrook didn't necessarily pan out here, but he's shown that it's worked out okay down in Charleston. And but yeah, I'm really pleased, I think, overall with the staff. The point about Monty Lee is like head coach in waiting ish. I think there is a narrative there that makes sense, but I also don't know if that's necessarily like completely set in stone either. I do think it's very good that you're able to lock him in, ease the transition. A lot of those questions that Stephen brought up about Manieri's ability to recruit in the NIL environment and the portal world and all of that, I think Monty Lee helps that transition as well. He's obviously proven that he's able to recruit the state, able to recruit the Southeast, able to recruit in the portal to the point that and this is one of the reasons that we're like, is it going to end up being Monty? During his little interim stint there for the last few weeks, he got a couple of recruits to sign out of high school, picked up a portal guy just yesterday. I assume that had a lot to do with Monty Lee.
Told me point blank on the phone. I wrote a quick thing on Gamecock Scoop. I actually knew the kid. I covered him in high school. Told me point blank on the phone he was waiting for Monty to be confirmed back before he'd sign with South Carolina. But that was it. Yeah.
So I think that was a big part of the salary that you're seeing. But I do also think that there is a narrative because let's be honest, whenever we were floating the idea that it might end up being Monty, which I do think he was a legitimate candidate for this job. He got a legitimate interview, all that. The message boards we're a little split on that, right? Like this is a guy that went to the team in the upstate, failed there, obviously has deep ties to the state, has deep ties to the University of South Carolina. So like you want it, you'd love it to work out for him. But I don't think that it inspired a ton of confidence. I do think at least narrative wise, him spending a few years under a legendary head coach like Paul Manieri, and especially if it works out and he continues to recruit well and you make it back to Omaha in the next 3 years or whatever. I do think that, let's say the idea is that it's going to end up ultimately being Monty. I do think at least maybe you can start to craft a narrative that he learned under that time, learned under, one of the best that there ever has been in college baseball. And then maybe it goes down a little bit smoother if that does end up being the case. But also, again, I don't think it's set in stone that that's the case. I think you worry about that when you worry about that. Who knows how long this could actually be. I remember when, back to the football example, but when Steve Spurrier signed, we probably thought 3 or 4 years, and he ended up being here for a decade. So who knows?
But yeah, just with Manieri, it's the health issue, if that is all legitimate, and I think that's part of the reason why you want to make sure you you keep him around if you did actually like Monty and you considered him for the head coaching job. If Maneri has some more flare-ups, health issues, anything like that out of the blue, that, let's face it, 67-year-old, he'll be 67 by first pitch next year, that 67-year-old men have, then you got him right there to step in and at least in an interim basis, finish the season out or. And I don't think this is going to happen. I don't think Maneri would have taken the job if his health was that bad. But I'm just saying, you never know. And I think that's probably why it was important to keep him on the staff. I'll tell you real quick before we kind of move on to some other stuff. I'll tell you, I talked to my source that kind of knows the Pals, and I was told that that Landon was never offered the head coaching job this time around. There was talk of being an assistant, but the Pals are not interested in being assistants. Apparently, was what I was told, that him and his family aren't going to uproot and move for an assistant coaching job, even at South Carolina. That was not something they were interested in. Now, I don't know if he'd have then offered the $500,000 a year salary, if that might have changed things. But I don't know. That from what I was told, that they've had seven or eight job offers over the last 2 years for head coaching jobs that he's turned down, including Charleston Southern gig this year. They asked him if he was interested, and he said no, and because he's just not interested in moving his family at this point in time. He's happy where he is, and it's going to take probably a big head coaching job to get him to move. So that was just another little tidbit I thought I'd pass along.
It's good to know. We talked about on the show last week, he probably wasn't ready for this job. I think if you had hired a coach from a D2 school, especially considering where you ended up or what you ended up hiring, that would have not gone down as well. I think my other point too on this, I was going to maybe write about it later, depending on how the presser goes. Does this, and this is something you two could probably speak better to, but growing up in the state with the program, does this calm some, I don't know if it's going to work. I don't, but some existential fears maybe about fallen blue blood. We're slipping, we're Cal State Fullerton, we're Rice, we're a program that used to go to Omaha every year. We're just not there anymore. Does the fact that a coach of this magnitude, of this prestige, who didn't have to take this job, who could have sat on his couch and played golf the rest of his life if he wanted to, still think South Carolina is a big enough job to move the needle? Does that calm some existential fears in the fan base maybe?
Caleb, you want to go?
I think yes, although I do think that there's still the split around his age and having coached for the last 3 years and all of that. But yeah, I mean, I think it gives some legitimacy. I think if you would have gone through this whole process and ended up with Monty, even if he ends up being great 5 years from now or whatever, there would have been a lot of that, right?
That's what I guess maybe that's a better way to phrase it. Is I'm asking it's the opposite of what it would have been if you'd hired Monty or even a Landon. It's like, we're South Carolina, why can't we do better?
Yeah, I think it both eases some of those concerns and also eases the people that would have been like, oh, another failed Ray Tanner coaching search or whatever, because those people tend to crop up. And I mean, you look at. I don't really think definitively that you can say any of his hires haven't panned out yet, besides in baseball. And I think this seems like a more sure thing than either of the previous two. Although, the Holbrook thing was also an obvious hire at the time. You're going to hire that guy. But, Steven, I don't know. What do you think? You're a little bit more plugged into the baseball side.
Yeah, yes, it is nice to be able to throw the headline up there. You get a national name on the baseball scene to get him to come, and it does give your program the look of at least the image of, look, we just hired a successful coach. I think it was important too, and I don't know if they're making enough interest of it, but I saw he had turned down. I wasn't aware of this. He had turned down Miami and another
Notre Dame job, maybe back where he was when that job
Notre Dame had offered him.
Yeah.
Okay. So he had turned. Well, that's an ACC job, 2 ACC jobs that he turned down then over the last 2 years since he's retired. So that makes you feel a little bit better that he would want to come out of retirement to coach South Carolina. I still worry that it could be a Herm Edwards. This is my retirement job type situation where he comes here and just I don't think that's the case. But yes, I mean, it was nice to get a name. I still, like I said, I'm not, booking my hotel room for Omaha next year, or probably even the following year. I'd like to see how he does recruiting wise. That would make me feel better if he goes out and they pull a couple of big names from the portal. I mean, if going back to some of these other, the bigger names South Carolina's hired in the past, when Lou Holtz came, you guys remember Derek Watson. He had Derek Watson commit almost immediately. Derek Watson wasn't considering South Carolina under Brad Scott. He met with Lou Holtz, and Lou Holtz got him committed. He had an up and down career at South Carolina, but I know he's at least all SEC first or second team one year. And Spurrier too. I mean, Spurrier was still a huge name at the time. He came in that first year, beat Florida, beat Tennessee. That helped think, okay, this guy's still got it, type vibes right away. So we'll find out. I mean, I'm kind of on the fence. I'm kind of 50-50. I see the positives of this hire. I do like that it gets you national headlines, put your program back in the national conversation, which frankly it hadn't been probably in the last 6 or 7 years, maybe with, that one season that Holbrook had where he got to a super regional. They had a pretty strong team that year. They were, top 5 for quite a bit of that season. But for the most part, the program hasn't been nationally relevant since 2012, 2013, Holbrook's first year. So now it is, at least right now. Let's just see if the results back it up on the field.
So you made another good point there, talking about Spurrier's first year, beat Tennessee, beat Florida, got some juice, like very quick proof of concept that, okay, this guy's still got it. I understand the expectations for, South Carolina baseball are different than football. There's a different, you're not hiring a 66-year-old for a long rebuild, but you're trying to flip this quick. This is an impossible question to ask on June 13th for a season that starts in February. We don't even know the roster yet, but like, how quick do you need to see some proof of concept here before you start going to, was this a mistake? Like, what do you need to see early?
Yeah, that's the tough part too, because if just getting to a regional isn't going to cut it. Right. Nobody's going to feel any better whatsoever if they go to a regional and get bounced next year. Probably even if they host a regional. Now, I'll say this: if South Carolina's a top 8 seed, it's just a situation where you get upset. You catch a team on a hot weekend and you get upset. I think that certainly is a different circumstance. But I really think he's going to need to hit a super regional, even if it's on the road. I think he needs to get back to at least that super level, and he's going to have to do that quick. And I'd have to say, if you're looking at this 5 years from now and you go hire this legendary coach that's got 6 Omaha appearances, well,
and you don't get one,
5 at LSU and another at Notre Dame, and you're not in Omaha in the first 5 years, and you're going to say, we could have got somebody a whole lot cheaper to do what you just did. So
that's a good point. Yep.
Yeah, I think it comes down to, like, if we think about what we know of the roster, because I do think there's going to have to be some things filled in. You're going to need to find another big bat, a la Cole Messina. Obviously, Ethan Petrie is expected to be back, which will help somewhat there. But did you think that this team underperformed this past season, basically? And does a coach that maybe can help eliminate some of the bunch of errors we saw in the SEC tournament and regional kind of tip you over, into making into a super regional next year? I think if that happens, then you're feeling pretty good. You're like, okay, you took what was there that was kind of right here and elevated it, 20% or whatever. I think it'd be tough to place the expectations much higher than that for year one. And then, it's really going to depend on what happens on the recruiting trail from there. Monty Lee and Maneri will earn their salary over the next couple of years, I think, on how the recruiting plays out, and we'll very quickly be able to decide if that $500,000 a year for an assistant was worth it too.
Yeah, I'm a little bit bullish on the roster for next year, early stages, and I almost hesitate to say it, but if you can keep it mostly together, just portal wise, you've got some, we've talked about this in the show before, some freshman pitchers that can give them another offseason in the weight program, add some velocity. A guy like Pitzer, Marlott, McCoy, like that's 3 guys right there. You've got some pitchers who are draft eligible, but maybe won't get picked. Like, okay, I'm not going to say Dylan Esky was Paul Skeens, but if you get him back for a senior year, you got another year of eligibility, like that helps. Like, A Matthew Becker, same thing. Like Eli Jones is draft eligible, but I haven't seen him ranked very highly in some of these big boards. Like, does he slip enough that you get him back? It's early, but I think you have some bones of a pitching staff for next year right now. And then it just comes about, like you said, replacing the Cena, supplementing the offense, kind of seeing what you can do on that front. But Steven, I'm sure you got some roster thoughts too.
Yeah, for next year, I mean, I think you're going to keep together, like what you kind of alluded to, Alan. I think you're keeping together a fairly decent offensive core because it sounds like Petrie's back. Well, Petrie is back, unless something out of the blue happens. But I think Kennedy Jones is back. Is the feeling he'll be back? He was a little inconsistent this year, but he had some moments where he was very streaky.
Blake Jackson.
What's that?
Blake Jackson.
Blake Jackson. I could see him having a really good year. I liked him. I thought he was a good player. I wish he'd have gotten some more. I don't know why it took him a long time to kind of break into that lineup, but I thought he was a strong player. And I think that the shortstop that you spoke about and you talked to, Gaskin, I think he's going to come in and start right away. I mean, I think he's better than Tippett or LaCroix day one.
I think he told me on the phone, I will say, he's a natural second baseman, that he's played other positions, but second's his primary, which needs second to fill anyway because Parker Nolan's gone, which that's not a huge loss, but he still needed might have him and Tippett.
That's right. Anywhere in the infield. My understanding is I think they're going to try to move Petrie back to right field and then kind of fill in the infield. But yeah, I do. I think there is the pitchers you named. Eli Jersenbeck is back. Should be back if he was considered one of their highest rated prospects. If his arm bounces back from the Tommy John surgery he had. And if I remember correctly, I think who had some good starts till he started having some arm problems. Copper in the middle of the week.
Eddie Copper,
Eddie Copper. I thought I had read that his injury was, whereas it was still season ending, wasn't as severe as I thought, and that he could possibly be back for next year as well. And I thought until he started having arm problems, he pitched well. And
agreed.
Caleb asked if thought the team overperformed or underperformed this year. I actually thought the pitching staff. Now they got shaky toward the end, the Georgia series, Tennessee, but I thought they performed better than I thought they were going to coming in. I thought we were going to have to win games. Carolina's going to have to win games 13-10, 12-11. Whereas offensively, I don't see how anybody can think that this team overperformed. I think they were a tremendous letdown from an offensive standpoint. Almost every single player, maybe outside of Messina, digressed that had been there the year prior, and that was a concern. That was a big concern when we were talking about if you kept Monty on as the head coach, his primary role as the hitting coach, and most of the players had a worse year last year than they did the year before. So, but yes, I agree. And they got a good offensive core. I like some of those young arms that you mentioned too. If they can pull in maybe 2 to 3 more guys out of the portal that are instant impact, I think they can be all right.
Yeah, I think the recruiting stuff's going to be really interesting to watch this offseason and the next couple of seasons. I was looking back at the 2008 LSU roster, which is the one that won the College World Series the next year, 2008 recruiting class. It was number 2 in the country. The one the next year was the top 5. The question is, is that LSU and all their resources and all of that, or is that Paul Mainieri as a recruiter? Is that Rooney as a recruiter, who was also on that staff, Terry Rooney, as a recruiter. Cliff Godwin actually was on that staff too, which is interesting. But I think that remains to be seen. But I believe in Monty Lee as a recruiter too. So you're adding two guys that already have established that they kind of can recruit. I like to think it'll come together. But does high school junior right now know Paul Mainieri's name after him being out of the scene for the last 3 years? I don't know. He's going to have to make an impact again, and then I think all of those credentials matter. But going to need to see an on-field impact pretty soon at South Carolina, or I don't know that anyone cares what he did 10 years ago, but like recruit-wise at least.
Yeah. I'm with you.
Yep, I think he's got to win within the first 2-3 years, probably 2 really, and have
I would say 2. Like in this modern age, like you need to,
Right. Yeah, when you look back at his LSU tenure, obviously he took over, I think, probably a program in worse shape than South Carolina is right now, but went 12-17 in the conference first season. But then the second season, he bounced back immediately, finished first in the West back when it was still split. Went to College World Series, And then 2009, his third season, is when they won the College World Series. And really, from there, never went more than 2 years without at least making 2 years in a row without at least making a super regional, and a couple more World Series mixed in there. So, yeah, I mean, 2 years sounds like the correct timeline for me if we're trying to compare what his tenure was like there versus here in the same conference.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like I said, I think the point Steven made that if you look up in 5 years and you never get to Omaha, you just say, we just hired the most expensive coach in program history and someone else could have done that a lot cheaper. I think that's probably about right. And I also think if you get to Omaha even one time, it's a successful hire. Like, you just got to get it back on the rails. Like, I know obviously you want more. Once you get one, you want two, you want three. But like, if you get there once, if you break that drought, I think that kind of alone is proof of concept for the hire and whatever succession plan you have in mind.
Yeah, and I do think you have to give Ray Tanner some credit for pulling this off. The list that we were putting out, the way that the search seemed to be going on the surface, which he does a pretty good job of keeping things under wraps. We saw that with the basketball search as well. But the way that it was playing out, it seemed like the fan base was not the most excited. And I think that he made the one hire that he could that does galvanize the fan base a little bit.
Yeah, I think it helped him too. I know we're running up against it here, but I think it helped him too that he brought in Chastain at softball. Not that softball has near the following that baseball does here, although I think it will be one of those sports that's going to get more popular because the SEC is just so, especially when they add Texas and Oklahoma, is going to be so far ahead of every other league. It's not even going to be, it's not even going to be close. I think it will get more popular. I think people are going to get behind Ashley Chastain. If you saw her presser yesterday, I mean, she was very emotional, crying. I mean, it's the first time that South Carolina's brought back an alum to coach a major sport. Boo Major was the first one, is my understanding, and she was equestrian. It's not like equestrian sells out. Seats, I don't even know what sells out their ticket allotment. I think it's free to go, but this is, I think people were very happy with that. I thought that was a very, the way he pulled Chastain in, knowing that she was about to interview for other SEC jobs, and he kind of pulled the trigger on Bev Smith, who had pretty much hit her ceiling, knowing that if I don't do this, the coach that we really want might be at another SEC program and then unattainable. I thought the way he pulled that, the way he did that was something that he should be. Something he should be doing. It was kind of I know it's softball. It's not a huge revenue sport. It's not even a revenue sport, but it's a somewhat of a power move there for the AD to do that. It was very similar to the way Georgia did with Kirby Smart. Obviously, a much smaller scale, but it was a Kirby Smart-like situation there. Except for South Carolina on the other end of it this time.
Poached a men's golf coach from Power 5 school too. Not that I know anything about golf or whether that's a good hire, but Ray Tanner made 3 hires in 6 hours. It was Paul Minieri, very well-liked former softball player who'd been in a tournament 2 years in a row at her other school, and Power 5 poaching.
Yeah, and to bring it full circle with the baseball, I think it takes some guts to throw down the sort of assistant salaries that you did to fill out that staff, and there's really no excuse for it not to work at this point, I think. So we'll just have to see how it plays out.
See what he has to say here in an hour and change. Live coverage, GamecocksScoop.com. I'm very interested to see how that goes. Not that he's going to get all about it. He's going to tell us his entire health and every plan for the program, but just kind of how this came together, or at least his perspective on that. So that should be interesting.
Yeah, and Alan will have live updates on that on GamecocksScoop.com. If you're starting to get a little football hungry, I've started to do my previews for all of the opponents of the upcoming season. The very first one on Old Dominion is up from earlier this week. Like I said, I think that we'll probably get some recruiting news in the next 24 to 48 hours, and then some big visits coming up next weekend. So we'll be back here with the GamecocksScoop.com podcast to talk about everything going on. In the meantime, we'll see you.